The crowd's applause was sliced open by one sound, a single, brutal shot that turned a college forum into panic, and by nightfall, a national manhunt was underway. If you find this report important, hit the subscribe button now so you don't miss updates as this story develops. What began as a routine speaking event ended with Charlie Kirk dead and a community demanding answers, while a rapid sequence of events raised as many questions as it answered. Within roughly 33 hours, police announced an arrest. 22-year-old Tyler Robinson was taken into custody. Cameras kept rolling, social feeds filled, and a country watched as investigators moved from chaos toward an apparent conclusion, yet for many observers that speed itself felt unsettling. Like a narrative tightened before every filament of evidence could be examined. The immediate hours after the shooting were frantic. First responders flooded the campus, roads were blocked, and investigators began assembling a timeline from shaky phone videos, bystander accounts, and physical clues at the scene. In that atmosphere, every fragment of information acquired outsized meaning. Authorities said they had recovered a weapon and matched it to the fatal round, and by following leads they located and arrested a suspect. For those grieving, the arrest offered a measure of closure. For skeptics, it felt premature. National and local voices urged calm even as the story was framed in partisan terms by some commentators. The intense media spotlight focused on the weapon, the footage, the suspect's background, and his digital footprint, a torrent of coverage that sometimes moved faster than the painstaking work of evidence gathering and verification. Investigators described a cluster of technical and physical evidence that, in their view, connected the suspect to the killing. Ballistic analysis tied a recovered rifle to the shell found at the scene. Traces consistent with gunshot residue were reported on clothing. Surveillance footage appeared to show a person of interest inside the venue before the shot. At the same time, forensic analysts were combing through encrypted messages and social media accounts, looking for indications of intent or planning. Those kinds of links, when ballistics, physical traces, and digital artifacts point in the same direction, can look decisive in a charging document. Yet every technical detail carries caveats. Metadata can be altered, chains of custody must be preserved, and context is critical. The tension between what appears conclusive on a news ticker and what forensic teams must prove in court framed initial legal filings and shaped public debate about how much we can trust early statements. As more material surfaced, the picture grew more complicated. New video clips and leaked messages emerged online that did not align neatly with the first timelines authorities released. Footage from different angles showed figures and movements that raised fresh questions about who was where and when. Messages that circulated suggested additional activity near the scene. Rather than settling the story, these new items widened the field of possibilities. Every leak generated multiple interpretations, some thoughtful, some conspiratorial, and the presence of more data paradoxically made it harder for the average person to discern the truth. In an era when anyone can post a clip or a screenshot, the public conversation tends to accelerate well beyond what investigators can responsibly confirm. Digging into the digital layer revealed further complexity. Analysts found device connections and location signals from multiple phones in and around the area at the time of the shooting. On their face, cell tower pings, login records, and geolocation data can map who is near a scene. In practice, those signals are imperfect. Phones can be spoofed, accounts can be accessed remotely, and logins can be cloned or routed through distant servers, creating false impressions of presence and agency. Cybersecurity experts warned that a connection between an account and a location does not, by itself, establish who is operating a device at a critical moment. Forensic teams emphasized that technical breadcrumbs must be corroborated with physical evidence and witness testimony to build a reliable narrative of events. Reporting into the suspect's online life painted a portrait that struck many as familiar in contemporary radicalization studies. Hours spent in politicized and extreme chat groups where grievance and isolation need affirmation. Investigators and journalists traced interactions in encrypted forums where heated rhetoric and calls for action sometimes circulate unchecked. That pattern, Someone finding social belonging in hostile online spaces can be a warning sign of a descent toward violence, but it does not equate directly to proof of a specific act. Presence in extremist communities may suggest motive or influence. It does not, on its own, explain the mechanics of a crime. Jurors and the public alike face the difficult task of weighing what online affiliations reveal about mindset while resisting the temptation to conflate association with guilt. Robinson's defense took a different tack, focusing on influence, manipulation, and the possibility of misattributed messages. The attorneys signaled their intent to probe whether an unknown online contact or a sequence of interactions could have pushed him toward violence, or whether some messages were fabricated or intercepted. Defense strategies like this aim to show that vulnerable people can be steered by others who understand how to exploit loneliness and grievance. If the defense can establish credible manipulation, it may undercut claims of premeditation and create reasonable doubt about the accused's lone responsibility. Those arguments turn the courtroom into a contest not just over facts, but over narrative. Who controlled the story before the first headline ran? Beyond the legal fight, the shooting has left a community fraying at the edges in ways that will take months, if not years, to fully understand. The immediate, visible scenes, candles, vigils, and prayer circles offered a small, fragile refuge for people trying to hold their grief together. Those gatherings, meant to comfort, too often became fault lines. For some, lighting a candle and speaking the victim's name was a sacred act of remembrance. For others, similar gestures felt like a public assertion of political identity, anointing the dead with a meaning that some in the community rejected. Calls for a permanent memorial to honor a life cut short were met with applause in some quarters and sharp dissent in others. Opponents warned that a plaque or statue might harden divisions, transforming a place of mourning into a stage for further controversy. The result has been a strange duality, shared sorrow that simultaneously reveals how little common ground remains. Schools and colleges felt the ripple first and perhaps most painfully. Classrooms and dorms where students once argued about syllabi and weekend plans now host solemn conversations about safety and the limits of speech. Teachers have found themselves improvising lessons about trauma, allocating classroom time to answer questions they were never trained to handle. Counselors reported higher demand for appointments. Administrators scrambled to expand mental health resources while trying to maintain a semblance of normal campus life. On social media, students posted raw, unfiltered grief and anger. Administrators issued measured statements aimed at calming tensions, a mismatch of pace and tone that sometimes inflamed rather than soothed. Board meetings and parent forums became arenas for heated debate, with some parents demanding immediate policy changes and others calling for restraint and context. The educational ecosystem, students, parents, teachers, support staff, has been asked to process collective grief while also continuing the daily work of learning, an emotionally costly balancing act. The human toll extends far beyond the visible scenes of candles and hashtags. Families of the victim and the accused are now living parallel tragedies. One household mourns a life taken, wrestling with the permanent absence of a loved one. Another contends with the sudden, crushing stigma of association. Family members who once went about ordinary routines now find themselves the subjects of suspicion and gossip. The psychological weight on both sides is enormous and often overlooked in public debate. Grief does not conform to timelines. It does not resolve when the headlines move on. The accused and their relatives face not only legal jeopardy but social isolation, financial strain, and the gnawing uncertainty of months or years of proceedings. Friends and neighbors must navigate awkward silences, uncertain how to show support without igniting another round of accusation. This is the quiet, long-term harm that headlines rarely capture. Small, persistent wounds to relationships and community trust that make everyday life more brittle. One of the clearest lessons here is the mismatch between speed and certainty in the digital age. Information now travels at a velocity that human institutions cannot easily match. Raw footage, cell phone clips, and anonymous posts circulate in minutes. Algorithms reward the emotional and the sensational. In that environment, emerging narratives often ossify before investigators have run the necessary tests. What begins as a plausible explanation can calcify into received wisdom, shaping public perception and even influencing witnesses' memories. The result is an inversion of the justice process. Instead of facts informing public opinion sometimes molds which facts are noticed and how they are interpreted. That dynamic endangers both the fairness of legal proceedings and the health of civic discourse. The criminal justice system, by contrast, operates on a slower cadence, deliberately so. Evidence must be collected, preserved, and examined. Witnesses need to be interviewed carefully. Forensic labs require time to run tests and validate findings. Those delays feel unsatisfying when compared with the rapid churn of social feeds, but they exist to protect against error. Chain of custody rules, expert validation, and procedural safeguards are not bureaucratic hurdles. They are safeguards designed to prevent wrongful conclusions from sticking. When we demand instant answers, we risk sacrificing these protections. Rushing to judgment can mean anchoring an entire narrative on evidence that later proves unreliable, and by then the reputational damage is done. Indeed, in many cases the harm inflicted by premature certainty cannot be undone by later corrections. For the public, the healthier instinct is patience and a commitment to discernment. That means favoring verified reporting over viral rumor and resisting the mechanical impulse to repeat every sensational claim. It also means recognizing the limits of what social media can tell us about complex criminal investigations. Screens capture moments, but rarely convey full context. A still image, a short clip, or a fragment of a message may suggest a plausible story, but it does not, on its own, offer proof. Civic responsibility in this moment requires thoughtful skepticism. Ask who benefits from a particular narrative, what evidence supports it, and whether established institutions have been given the time to do their work. Waiting for verified information is not passivity. It is an act of discipline that preserves the possibility of a fair outcome. Transparency from officials helps, but transparency has limits too. Investigators must balance public accountability with the need to protect ongoing inquiries and the safety of witnesses. Leaks, unverified tips, and amateur sleuthing can interfere with legitimate investigative lines and expose witnesses to intimidation. At the same time, secrecy can fuel suspicion. The path forward calls for a careful calibration. Officials should communicate clearly about what is known, what remains unverified, and why certain details cannot be disclosed. When the public is given a clear window into the method and the timeline of an investigation, trust is easier to sustain even when answers take time. The case also forces a broader conversation about how communities can heal after sudden violence. Public mourning rituals, vigils, memorials, and shared remembrances can be powerful tools for collective recovery, but only if they are organized to include a range of voices and to encourage reflection rather than recrimination. Grassroots efforts that bring together family members, faith leaders, students, and civic officials can help create common ground. Counseling services, community dialogues, and restorative practices offer avenues for addressing trauma in ways that avoid re-traumatizing victims or inflaming tensions. These approaches are not quick fixes, but they acknowledge a simple truth. Healing is a social process that requires sustained attention and resources. Finally, the episode underscores a civic responsibility that goes beyond any single case. In moments of crisis, we are tested not just by events, but by our reactions. Choosing empathy over enmity, patience over certainty, and evidence over rumor are not abstract virtues. They are practical tools that protect communities and preserve justice. The search for truth in a noisy media environment is hard work, but it is essential work. It demands media literacy, institutional integrity, and a communal willingness to hold space for both grief and due process. As investigations proceed and courts do their work, the imperative remains the same. Protect the integrity of the process, support those who mourn, and resist the temptation to let outrage substitute for understanding. Behind every screen grab and every headline are human lives, a family in mourning, another family under suspicion, and neighbors trying to make sense of a moment that appended them all. If we can remember that, even as the details emerge slowly and imperfectly, we give ourselves the best chance to rebuild trust and to honor both truth and human dignity. If you want to stay updated with verified developments, please subscribe for future updates.